This is Bill Brady doing another video for the Kingship course. This particular video is about the 16 promises to overcomers. I've put together a document that I would love to be able to just share with you, but the best way I can show it to you is to share it right here on the screen, then you can see it. What I'll do is go down through it slowly just so you can see it, and then I'll start talking about it. You can pause this recording at any point that you want to, so you're able to read any portion of this document. What I've got is an introduction to the 16 promises, and then I have each of the promises listed. A couple of ecclesias have one promise made to overcomers in that ecclesia. Some of the 7 ecclesias have 2 promises made, some have 3. One ecclesia has 5 promises made to the overcomers in that ecclesia. Total is 16 promises. If you take the 1 in the tens place and the 6 in the 1 place and add 1 plus 6 together, you get 7. Very interesting. 7 ecclesias, 7 letters, and then 1 plus 6 is 7 again. Just about done showing you the document. And again, you can pause this recording at any point to take a look at any particular part of this document. Okay, so you've seen it all. Now let's do the introduction portion of this. Jesus made promises to individual overcomers. So the promises are not the ecclesia. There are other promises made to the ecclesia. We'll talk about those in another recording. These promises are made to those individuals within each ecclesia who overcome. And each ecclesia has a specific situation or combination of situations in that ecclesia that those believers in that ecclesia need to overcome with respect to that list of situations and the combination of those situations. I see that these situations are a combination of evil men functioning and fallen angels functioning. We'll talk about that at another time. At one point, I thought that these 7 ecclesias, these 7 letters to 7 ecclesias, was a progression, so that the promises were made to those in the first ecclesia that overcame, and then the promises were made to those in the second ecclesia that overcame, which I still agree with. The actual ecclesias at that time, these promises are to those individuals who overcame within each specific ecclesia. But today, I don't see that these 7 letters are progression that each of us has to go through from beginning to end. Rather, I see that these are 7 examples of situations in an ecclesia, and each of us has to overcome with respect to a particular ecclesia, whether it's an actual ecclesia in a citywide ecclesia, or whether it's an online ecclesia, or what it is, we each have to overcome with respect to the situations that are occurring within that ecclesia that we're within. And the situations that we're up against can be some of the ones that were listed in these 7 ecclesias and the seven letters of 7 ecclesias, or they can be other situations that aren't specifically listed there. And the combination of situations that we have to overcome with respect to is unique to that particular ecclesia that we're a part of. Now, one of the promises is to sit down as a king next to Jesus. I see that all 16 of these promises have to do with kingship. And I see that if any of you have been given any one of these 16 promises, then you are safe to make the assumption that all the other 15 promises have been made to you also. And therefore, you can go through and see those promises are for you, receive that promise, and at a later time start to function in that promise. What is the advantage of what is the benefit of being an overcomer who overcomes in an ecclesia? Well, the first one is that all 16 promises are given to you, including that you begin to function in kingship. But the second one is that you are then included in the first resurrection. And we'll talk more about first resurrection, second resurrection when we speak about the resurrection of the dead and a later recording or recordings, most likely. But just say that the first resurrection occurs and it's just for those who have overcome. And the second resurrection is for all the other believers who have not overcome, plus all the unbelievers who never believed. And they're all resurrected in the second resurrection. So we've given you an introduction to the 16 promises. Now, I should do one more thing. I should explain why I now think that they're no longer a progression. And that is because I noticed that two of the promises, one given in one ecclesia and another promise given to another ecclesia, are the same thing. And so it wasn't actually a progression, it was the same promise. So we're going to take a look at the second promise. That is, he who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death. What is the second death? Well, the first death is mortal death. And that's what, when Adam sinned, Adam and Eve sinned, the promise was dying, you will die. So you begin to die at the time you sinned, that they sinned, but then they also continued to die until they actually had a day and time of their death, their mortal death. So they were dying until they died fully. Dying, you will die. That's the first death. The second death is being cast into the lake of fire. So this promise is that you will not be hurt by the second death. Well, the way to not be hurt by the second death is to not be cast into the lake of fire. And the other promise is the ninth promise, which is the same thing stated in a different way. He overcome, I got it wrong. Wait a moment, let me find it again here. Sorry. Here, yes, the ninth promise. He overcomes, I will not erase his name from the book of life. Well, if your name is in the book of life, then you are not going to be cast into the lake of fire, because at the great white throne, there are two things that the judgment is based upon. The one is your name in the book of life or isn't? If it's in the book of life, you're not cast into the lake of fire. If your name isn't in the book of life, then you are cast into the lake of fire. So he overcomes, I will not erase his name from the book of fire, a book of life rather. If your name is erased from the book of life, then you're going to be cast into the lake of fire. So promise 2 and promise 9 are exactly the same promise, spoken in two different ways. This tells me that this is not a progression of promises that you have to overcome with respect to the first ecclesia and then the second ecclesia and the third ecclesia. It's just that you overcome in an ecclesia. The other thing to be aware of is some believers believe that these 7 ecclesias represent 7 time frames in church history. And it doesn't really matter whether that's true or not, because those folks all agree that we're currently in the time of the 7th ecclesia, Laodicea, which is the one that has the promise that those who overcome will sit down next to Jesus as a king. So regardless of whether that is a true fact or not, the sitting down as a king is available. And if you sit down as a king, then all the rest of the promises are yours as well. So I've given you an introduction to the 16 promises. I've explained that at one point I thought this was a progression, and that now I do not. Now I see that if you overcome with respect to an ecclesia that you're in, and you overcome respect to all the circumstances that are in that ecclesia, and become an overcomer in that ecclesia, then you are given all 16 of these promises, which means that if you've had an encounter and been given any one of these 16 promises, then you can go through the rest of them and simply know that they're for you. So you see that they're for you, the promises made to you, you receive that promise, and then at a later point, you enter into actually functioning in that function. So we have now looked at an introduction to the 16 promises to overcomers in the 7 ecclesias in the revelation of Jesus Christ, chapters 2 and 3. From here on in, I'm going to do one recording per promise.